The house was too quiet for how big it was. Claire adjusted the strap of her worn leather tote bag on her shoulder, the soles of her sneakers barely making a sound against the polished wood floors. A cleaning crew had clearly swept through hours earlier. Everything gleamed, from the floor-to-ceiling windows to the brushed steel appliances in the kitchen. She'd expected toys, juice stains, evidence of life, but the space was pristine. Cold, almost. She stepped further in, following the sound of distant footsteps until a small voice broke through the hush. "Dad, is she the new babysitter?" A boy 6, maybe 7, stood at the top of the staircase, one sock slipping off his foot, holding a stuffed dinosaur like it was armor. Claire offered a soft wave, her nerves crawling under her skin. This was not what she thought it'd be. Behind him, heavier footsteps approached, and then he appeared. No photo online had done him justice. Alexander Ford, tech mogul, single father, tabloid ghost, looked exactly like the kind of man who hadn't had to explain himself in years. Tall, serious, and too well put together for someone who allegedly worked from home now. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, a Rolex at his wrist. His eyes, slate gray and unreadable, landed on her like a challenge. "Claire Moore?" he asked. She straightened. "Yes, I was told you needed help with after-school care and light tutoring for your son. I came recommended through." "I know who recommended you." He was already walking past her, down a hallway she assumed led to some kind of office. The boy Ben, if she remembered the agency's intake sheet correctly, watched her with open curiosity, a stark contrast to his father's cool reserve. She followed slowly, taking everything in. The house was sleek, modern, expensive. The kind of place that felt curated, not lived in. She wondered how often Ben was allowed to climb on the furniture. They ended up in a study with dark wood shelves and a wall of awards, most of which looked untouched. Alexander leaned against the edge of his desk. "I have a very demanding schedule," he said without preamble. "Calls late at night, travel with little notice. I need someone who doesn't make me check in or explain when I'm stuck in a meeting." Claire nodded, choosing her words carefully. "That's what I do. I keep things running so the parent can work. I'm not here to judge or interfere." He tilted his head like that answer wasn't what he expected. "Good, then you start today. Ben has homework after snack, but he won't ask for help unless someone's there." "Noted," she said, folding her hands. "And what about you?" He paused. "What about me?" "If Ben has questions about his mom or school drop-offs, or what happens when you're away." His jaw tightened just slightly. "Ben knows what to do. He's used to this." Claire's throat caught at the phrase, "used to this." She offered a quiet nod. When she turned to leave the office, his voice stopped her. "You'll be paid generously," he said. "I expect professionalism." She met his eyes, something in her resisting the urge to shrink away. "Of course," she replied, "but I think Ben needs more than professionalism. He's 7. She left without waiting for his answer. Ben was shy at first, quiet the way kids are when they've been taught not to ask for much. But when she made grilled cheese instead of offering him a pre-packed snack tray, something shifted. His shoulders relaxed. He sat at the kitchen island and told her about a school project. When he pulled out his worksheet, he asked for help spelling volcano. She didn't miss the flicker of surprise in his eyes when she knelt beside him unhurried and asked him to sound it out instead of just giving the answer. That night, as she was packing up her bag, Alexander appeared again. No knock, just there, like he materialized from the shadows of his own house. "He's already asleep," Claire said, pulling on her coat. "We read 2 chapters from a book he picked." Alexander gave a single nod. "You cook?" "I can." He asked for grilled cheese. It seemed like he hadn't had that in a while. "I don't let him eat junk," he said flatly. Claire gave a small smile. "Then it's a good thing I used real cheddar and whole grain bread. One sandwich won't ruin your empire." He blinked, caught off guard. She expected a sharp retort. Instead, he ran a hand over his jaw, something unreadable in his eyes. "I'll see you tomorrow then," she said, letting herself out before he could say anything else. Weeks passed. Slowly, routines bloomed. Claire arrived each day before Ben got off the school bus. She unpacked his backpack, made snacks, sat with him while he worked through math and spelling. She started learning his moods, the slump in his shoulders when he had a bad day, the way he lingered after stories ended like he didn't want to be alone. When she asked about his mom once, he just shrugged. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. Claire didn't push. Instead, she reached for his hand and squeezed. Sometimes Alexander was home when she left, sometimes he was, but even when he was, he rarely lingered. He watched, though. She felt it. From the kitchen doorway, from the stairs, from across the room when she laughed at one of Ben's terrible knock-knock jokes. He never said much, but Claire started to see the signs of strain around his mouth, in his posture. The long hours, the relentless focus. She knew the type, high-functioning burnout with a hero complex. He wasn't cruel, just closed, controlled, like life had taught him emotions were liabilities. But he noticed things. "You left your scarf," he said one evening, holding it out as she stood at the door. It was on the bench. She took it, "Thanks. You walk home." "I like to, it clears my head." He looked at her again, and for a second she saw something unguarded there. Ben been happier. Claire smiled. He's a great kid. That night she passed by his office and saw the light still on. She paused. He was inside, shirt rumpled, his tie draped over a chair, staring at a photo of Ben on his desk. The look on his face wasn't one of a man on top of the world. It was someone barely holding it together. Claire kept walking. She wasn't here for him. But something inside her was beginning to soften anyway. A Friday in October brought rain, and Ben begged her to build a blanket fort. She agreed, stringing up sheets with clothespins and dragging in half the couch cushions. He squealed with laughter when she read in different voices, using the flashlight to make shadow puppets. Claire felt something bloom inside her. This was the kind of moment that mattered, not the structured routines or fancy educational apps. When Alexander got home early, he found them curled up in the fort, both of them mid-giggle, the smell of popcorn hanging in the air. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. Then quietly he stepped inside and crouched by the entrance. "Can I come in?" Ben beamed. "Yeah, but take off your shoes, it's the rule." Claire met Alexander's eyes as he kicked off his shoes and crawled in awkwardly. For the first time, he wasn't the CEO, just a dad, just a man trying. He didn't say a word to her directly that night, but when she got home, there was a message from him. "Thank you for giving him that." Claire stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. She didn't reply. Not yet. This wasn't the kind of story that happened overnight. But something had begun, and it was no longer just about the job. The first time Alexander asked her to stay late, it wasn't about the job. Not really. He didn't phrase it that way, of course. He said he had a late call with the Singapore office, that his assistant was out sick and Ben was asking for her. It all sounded perfectly rational on paper, but Claire had started to recognize the subtle notes beneath his clipped tone, the places where control gave way to something quieter, lonelier. She said yes without asking for overtime. That evening Ben wanted to bake. Claire found the kitchen stocked but untouched, full of appliances that still had their stickers on. They made oatmeal cookies that stuck to the tray and fell apart when they tried to lift them. Ben called them cookie pancakes and proudly ate 4. They were cleaning up when Alexander stepped into the kitchen, no tie, jacket slung over one shoulder. "I smell sugar," he said, eyeing the destruction on the counter. Claire didn't apologize. "Ben's idea, I supervised." Ben looked up. "They're kind of mushy but really good. Want one?" Alexander hesitated, then picked up a broken piece and took a bite. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You're right, not terrible." Claire turned away to hide her grin, rinsing the mixing bowl. He stood there a moment longer, then did something unexpected. He rolled up his sleeves, stepped beside her, and started drying. She glanced sideways at him. "That's new." He didn't look up. "I used to, before everything got big." She didn't ask what everything meant. She didn't need to. She could read it in the tension behind his eyes, the way he moved like he was always calculating the next step, the next crisis. Still, he stayed next to her, quiet, present, and in that silence something shifted. He wasn't hiding behind meetings tonight. The first real snow arrived in November, a thick, quiet storm that blanketed the city. School was canceled, and Claire showed up anyway, boots wet and cheeks pink, holding a thermos of hot chocolate she'd made at home. Ben was already at the window in his pajamas, nose smudging the glass, his excitement crackling. "Can we build a snowman?" he asked before she'd even taken off her coat. Claire laughed, "Only if you help me shovel your walkway first." He agreed, and within the hour they were out in the yard. She wore borrowed gloves and used a kitchen pot for Ben's snowman hat. She hadn't played like that in years, hadn't rolled snowballs or fallen back into a snow angel since before life had gotten so heavy. But with Ben squealing beside her, she forgot to guard herself. Alexander watched them from the balcony, coffee mug in hand. She saw him step back inside after a while, and later found a folded blanket left by the front door for when they came in, soaked and flushed. No words, just that simple gesture. When she peeled off Ben's layers and helped him into dry clothes, he said something that caught her breath mid-motion. "I wish you lived with us." Claire paused, brushing snowmelt from his hair. "Why that?" "Because when you're here, Dad laughs more." Her throat tightened, she pulled him in, held him close. "He's learning," she said softly. "It's hard to smile when your heart's been broken, but he's trying, Ben, that means everything." Ben nodded against her shoulder. "I think he's scared." Claire kissed the top of his head. "Me too, sometimes." Later that week, Alexander drove her home. It was the first time he'd offered. She hesitated before accepting, unsure if she wanted that barrier to shift, but the temperature had dropped and the buses were unreliable. The car was warm, the silence different than before, not tense, just quiet. When they stopped outside her building, he didn't put the car in park. "You always knew how to speak to him," he said, voice low. "You never pushed, you waited." Claire turned, surprised by the candor. "That's the only way he lets you in." He nodded, eyes forward. "It's the same with me." She didn't ask if he meant himself or Ben. Maybe both. Maybe the difference didn't matter. She reached for the door handle but didn't open it. "You're doing better than you think," she said softly. He finally looked at her. There was something unguarded in his eyes, something worn thin, like the edges of a letter folded too many times. "No one tells me that," he said. "Well," Claire said, giving him a small smile, "someone should." She stepped out before he could say more. December brought Christmas lights and catalog chaos. Claire didn't know if Alexander celebrated. There were no decorations in the house, no tree, but Ben clearly wanted to. One afternoon, he mentioned it in passing while coloring. "Other kids get trees with ornaments and candy canes." Claire looked up from the couch. "Do you want a tree?" He shrugged. "Dad says we don't have time or space, but I think he just doesn't like it." That night after Ben went to bed, she found Alexander at the kitchen table, laptop open but untouched. She sat across from him. "I think you should let Ben pick a tree." He glanced up, brow furrowing. "It's just a week off school, we're not religious." "It's not about that, it's about joy, ritual, hope." He closed the laptop slowly. "You really believe that?" "I think after what he's lost and what you've both carried, you could use a little wonder." Something flickered in his expression. He looked tired but not annoyed. "I'll think about it," he said. 2 days later, Claire arrived to find a modest fur in the living room, bare but standing. A box of lights sat beside it. Ben was practically vibrating. "Dad said I could decorate it with you." Claire looked at Alexander, who gave a half shrug like he didn't know how this had happened. She smiled. "Let's do it." They strung the lights while Ben hummed carols off-key. Claire taught him how to loop the garland. Alexander hung a single ornament, awkward but sincere. Afterward, with the lights glowing and the room dim, Ben fell asleep on the couch, curled against Claire's side. Alexander stood at the doorway for a long moment, watching. Then quietly he crossed the room, picked up a second blanket and covered them both. He didn't say a word. But Claire felt it. Something breaking open. Not loud, but real. January arrived like a reset button. The tree was gone, the house returned to its usual quiet order, but something had shifted beneath the surface, something neither of them acknowledged outright. Not yet. Claire had been working with them for nearly 3 months, and still there were no clear lines drawn. She wasn't family. She wasn't staff. She was something in between. Ben called her his friend now. Alexander, he called her Claire, but there was a gravity to it lately, like the word carried weight. One evening, she found a handwritten note in Ben's backpack. It was from his teacher, praising his increased participation in class and how he'd started volunteering to read aloud. Claire smiled to herself as she set the paper aside. She didn't tell Alexander about it right away. Instead, she taped it to the inside of a cupboard door, where only someone who lived there would see it. The next day, she noticed it had been moved, retaped higher, as if someone taller, someone with quiet pride and no words, had seen it and wanted it to stay. The first real crack came one Thursday. Alexander was late, not 10 minutes, not 20. An hour and a half passed before he walked in, jacket soaked with rain, his face pale with something that wasn't just exhaustion. Claire was at the kitchen table with Ben, who was doing his best to pretend he hadn't kept checking the window. The kid had stopped asking about his dad 20 minutes in. He just sat there quietly, chewing his sleeve, pretending he wasn't worried. Alexander dropped his keys on the counter and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "The meeting ran over and then the car." Claire shook her head, her voice soft. "You should have called. I didn't have time to. You made time for everything else." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. He froze, guilt flickering in his expression. Ben stood up, yawning theatrically. "I'm gonna brush my teeth." Claire waited until he was out of earshot before turning back to Alexander. Her voice was quieter now, but firmer. "He needs to know you'll show up, even if it's late, even if it's just a text." "I know," he said, barely above a whisper. "I know." Claire studied him. He looked tired in a different way tonight, not just overworked, fragile. "Are you okay?" she asked, and for the first time she meant it about him. Alexander hesitated. "I got news today," he said finally. "About the company, we're restructuring, which sounds clinical until you realize it means people will lose jobs." She folded her arms, waiting. "I spent all day in meetings trying to make the math work without letting people go, and I still didn't come home on time." Claire walked over and stood in front of him, not touching, but close enough that the space between them held heat. "You're doing what you can," she said, "but you're not just running a company, you're raising a person." His eyes dropped. "I'm not sure I know how to do both." "You don't have to be perfect," she said, "just present." The silence after that was thick, but not uncomfortable. When she stepped back, he caught her wrist lightly, just enough to hold her there. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't about the reprimand or the comfort. It was about being seen. February came with gray skies and a thin layer of old snow that refused to melt. Ben got the flu, and suddenly Claire wasn't just helping with homework. She was managing medicine schedules, cold compresses, and endless reruns of nature documentaries narrated by soothing British voices. Alexander canceled meetings, sat beside the couch with bowls of soup he didn't know how to make, and offered quiet company when Ben's fever climbed. Claire saw it, the unease in him, the helplessness that came when something couldn't be solved with strategy. But she also saw the way he held Ben's hand without thinking, the way he tucked in the blanket and checked the thermometer every hour. Claire stayed longer those days, not because he asked, but because it felt right. One night after Ben had finally fallen into a fever-sweaty sleep, they ended up in the kitchen, too tired for words. Claire leaned against the counter, sipping tea. Alexander stood at the stove, absently stirring a pot he didn't really need to. "He was asking for you," he said quietly. "At one point when he was half asleep, he thought you were already here." Claire's hand tightened around the mug. "I think he dreams about you being part of us," he added, his voice raw with something she hadn't heard before. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over, gently took the spoon from his hand, turned off the burner. "We should both get some sleep," she said softly. But as she stepped back, his hand brushed her arm, and this time neither of them moved away. Weeks passed and the fever faded. Ben returned to school. Claire resumed her usual hours, but nothing returned to the way it was before. There were longer glances now, pauses in conversation that held meaning neither of them dared name. One afternoon, Claire arrived early and heard piano music drifting down the hall. She followed the sound quietly, confused. Ben didn't play, and found Alexander in the study, seated at the baby grand she hadn't known he kept behind the folding screen. He didn't notice her at first. His fingers moved slowly, hesitantly across the keys. The melody wasn't polished, it was searching. Claire leaned against the doorframe, saying nothing. When he finally looked up, surprised, she just tilted her head. "I didn't know you played." "I used to," he said, "before I built things I couldn't step away from." She crossed the room, sat on the bench beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. "You're still building," she said gently. He looked at her, really looked, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them. Not a confession. Not yet. But something close. The kind of thing that takes root before you have words for it. He didn't kiss her. She didn't line in. But when she left that night, she did so with the sound of his music still playing in her chest. Spring arrived slowly, the kind of hesitant bloom that only appeared in places that had been gray for too long. Claire noticed it first in the trees lining the street outside their house, buds that hadn't been there the week before, pale green leaves curled like secrets. Inside the house, the change was subtler. Ben woke up earlier, laughed more easily, left drawings taped to the fridge with words like team scrawled underneath stick figures holding hands. Alexander kept those drawings up, even when the fridge started to look cluttered. He never said a word about them, he just started bringing home magnets. Claire had settled into a rhythm that no longer felt like a job. She didn't look at the clock when she stayed late. She didn't keep track of the extra hours spent helping Ben with school projects or sitting with him while he tried to understand his own grief in that wordless, childlike way. She had become part of the architecture. So when the call came, offering her a full-time teaching role at a private elementary school across town, she didn't know what to do with it. The principal had said the job was hers if she wanted it, a stable salary, summers off, benefits, a path forward. She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no either. That night, as she was folding laundry in the guest room, Ben had spilled juice down his shirt and insisted she wash it immediately. Alexander stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Do you like being here?" he asked. Claire looked up slowly. "With Ben." "With both of us." It wasn't a trick question, but it felt like a test, one she hadn't studied for. "I do," she said, "but I also know this isn't forever." Something in his jaw tensed. "Why not?" "Because I don't live here, I don't belong to either of you. I'm the bridge, not the home." He stepped inside slowly, like he was afraid she'd move if he got too close. "You've given us more than you know." Claire folded another shirt, not looking up. "That's not a reason to keep someone." He didn't argue, just watched her. She didn't tell him about the job offer, not yet. But the seed was planted, and it grew in the silence between them. April brought an open house at Ben's school. Claire didn't expect to be invited. She assumed Alexander would go alone, maybe sit stiffly at the back of the classroom while Ben nervously read his report on sea turtles. But when she arrived that Thursday afternoon, Ben ran up to her outside the school doors, pulling at her hand. "I told Dad you had to come too," he said, breathless with excitement. Alexander was standing by the car, looking uncomfortable in a blazer. Claire hesitated for just a second, then walked with them inside. The classroom was a chaos of construction paper and crayon drawings. Ben's desk was decorated with a handmade name tag and a wobbly paper model of the ocean. When he stood to read his report, his voice was clear, proud. Claire watched Alexander watch him, his posture softening with every word. Afterward, parents mingled, asked questions, made vague small talk about summer plans. Claire was reaching for a paper cup of fruit punch when another mother smiled politely. "You're the nanny?" she asked. Claire blinked. "I." Alexander appeared at her side before she could finish. "She's the reason Ben has a voice again," he said quietly. "She's not just anything." The woman flushed and mumbled something before turning away. Claire looked up at him. "That was unnecessary." "No," he said, "it was." He didn't apologize for claiming her in that quiet, deliberate way. She didn't ask him to. They didn't talk about the moment afterward, but something had changed again. The air between them was tighter now, stretched with things unsaid. It finally broke on a Sunday morning, when Claire arrived to find Alexander in the backyard, trying and failing to assemble a kite. Ben was laughing, tangled in string. Alexander looked up, saw her standing there, and sighed. "I thought this would be easy," he said, hands in his hair. "Instructions make it look so simple." Claire walked down the steps, took the kite from his hands, and turned it the right way. "Sometimes you have to let go a little for it to fly." He looked at her like he wasn't sure they were still talking about kites. They got it in the air together, finally, both holding the string as Ben whooped and ran across the grass. The sun was warm, the wind just enough. Claire glanced sideways at Alexander. "You could be happy, you know." He didn't look at her. "I'm not sure I remember how." "You don't have to do it all at once, just start with one moment." He was quiet for a long time, watching the kite dance in the sky. "I think this is one of them," he said. And for the first time since they met, she saw something fully unguarded on his face. Hope. That night after Ben had gone to bed and she was slipping on her coat by the front door, Alexander stood in the hallway, the light behind him soft and gold. "I've been thinking," he said. Claire turned. "You were right about not being a permanent part of this, not unless we ask you to be." Her chest tightened. "Alex, I'm not good at this, at people, at saying things that matter." "You've said more than you think." He stepped forward, slow and steady. "I don't know where this goes. I just know I don't want to go back to how things were, before you." Her breath caught. He reached out, gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not asking for an answer, I just wanted you to know." Claire searched his face. Then very quietly she said, "There's something I need to tell you too." And she did. About the job. The offer, the door waiting just slightly open. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just nodded. "When do you need to decide?" "Soon." They stood in the stillness, neither moving. "Whatever you choose," he said, "I'll still be grateful you came into our life." Claire smiled. "That's not what Ben wants to hear." He gave a dry laugh. "No, he wants a promise." Claire looked up at him, her voice steadier now. "I'm not gone yet." And somehow that felt like more than enough for now. May arrived with longer days and the scent of lilacs on the wind. The house breathed differently now, doors left open, sunlight flooding through windows that had been closed all winter. It was the kind of warmth that made people softer without realizing it. Ben had taken to drawing on the patio with chalk every afternoon. Some days it was dragons or superheroes, but more often now it was pictures of three people standing in front of a house. He didn't label them. He didn't need to. Claire noticed the way Alexander would glance at those drawings when passing by. He never said anything, but once she saw him nudge one with the toe of his shoe when it started to fade, like he didn't want it to disappear just yet. The school offer hung between them like a second sun, not blinding but ever present. Claire still hadn't accepted, still hadn't declined. She moved through each day with a kind of gentle awareness of time, of proximity, of how long she could keep pretending things could stay exactly as they were. Then one morning, Alexander made breakfast. She walked in to find the kitchen smelling of coffee and something slightly overcooked. "I tried to beat you to it," he said, flipping a pancake with more hope than skill. "Ben says you make them better, though." Claire set down her bag, amused. "So this is a competition?" "No," he said without turning. "It's a thank you." She stilled, he plated the pancakes, slid them across the island. For staying, for giving us space to change. Claire sat slowly. You've been doing the changing, I just made room for it. He looked at her then, something open and unresolved in his eyes. I don't want you to go. She didn't answer, not yet. Ben bounded in moments later, hair messy from sleep, and immediately launched into a debate about whether pancakes were better with chocolate chips or bananas. Claire let the moment pass, let the conversation shift, but she felt it in her chest, that weight, that pull, that impossibly human ache of wanting two futures at once. The next week brought a finality to things. Claire had to give an answer. She walked home the long way after her shift, thinking through every angle. She built her life around motion, around doing the responsible thing, around never staying too long where she wasn't needed. But this wasn't about need anymore. It was about want. She remembered Ben's voice, sleepy and certain, whispering one night as she tucked him in, "You make this house feel happy again." And Alexander, quieter than ever these days, hovering near her in a way that felt less like distance and more like fear. That night she wrote a letter to the school, thanking them, declining. She didn't sleep much. The next afternoon, Claire walked into the house with ice cream for Ben and a knot in her stomach. Alexander was in the study, pacing. Ben was upstairs with a friend from school. The house hummed with quiet activity, and she knew the conversation needed to happen now before the days stretched any longer. She knocked gently on the doorframe. "Can we talk?" He looked up, startled by something in her tone. "I gave them my answer," she said. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. "I turned it down." She crossed the room, slow, steady, until she stood in front of him. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, "but I know what it feels like, and that's enough for me to stay." Alexander's throat moved as he swallowed. "You stayed," he said quietly, like he was testing the truth of it aloud. "I did. I was trying to be fair. I didn't want to ask you to choose us." "I wasn't choosing between a job and you," Claire said. "I was choosing between safe and true." A beat of silence passed. Then he reached for her hand. And this time she let him. It wasn't a kiss that followed. It was slower, deeper. A breath shared between two people who had built a life out of broken pieces, gently handed back to each other. That weekend, the three of them went to the botanical gardens. Ben ran ahead through the paths, darting between fountains and rose trellises. Claire walked beside Alexander, their hands brushing occasionally but never fully intertwined. Not yet, not in public, not because of fear, but because some things deserve to unfold in their own time. At one point Ben turned back, running toward them, arms flung wide. He crashed into Alexander's leg, grabbing hold. "Can we get pizza tonight?" Alexander looked at Claire. She smiled, "Only if you help clean up after." Ben grinned and nodded furiously before running off again. Alexander watched him for a long moment, then turned back to her. "This is still hard," he said softly, "balancing it all, the business, the past, the future." Claire nodded, "But you're not doing it alone anymore." He exhaled like something had lifted from his chest. "I believe you," he said. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just took his hand fully this time, lacing her fingers with his. The path ahead curved through wildflowers and sunlight, and though they didn't know exactly where it led, they walked it anyway. Together,